And we are back with another episode of ClubCast, this time episode 10. And it's our favorite time of the year, baby. October. We mentioned it last week. We're going to be talking playoffs, and we're kicking it off with the wild card matches that start later today when this episode drops. A lot of good, exciting matchups that we have. No matter what teams are playing, even if it's not my own team, because, I'm a Dodgers fan. They don't play until Saturday. It's good to see playoff baseball, and it's not only is baseball my favorite sport. I know it's your favorite sport, but just postseason in terms of playoff atmosphere, I feel like baseball takes the cake in a lot of arguments there. But we have a lot of stuff to talk about with all the wild card matches that we'll talk about. We'll give our picks because we know everybody wants to hear our opinions about this types of stuff. But yeah, I'm excited. How excited are you for October?
It's fun, man. I know we keep talking about it, but it's one of the first postseasons in probably a long time. There's no real clear favorite. Everybody likes the Braves, of course, but all these other teams, like, we're gonna make picks. Any of these series, really, other than one, in my opinion, could go either way. It's going to be fun. It's a lot of competitive teams in the first round, and then we get the dogs. When we get to that second round, then you get the 100-win team. So yeah, man, I'm excited. After experiencing it last year, actually being there, just falling in love with the whole process and the whole postseason. So I'm excited. I'll be there on Wednesday, so you get some content from me there.
Yeah. I mean, before we get into it, they mentioned it on Talking Baseball for John Boy Media, and that kind of got me thinking. In terms of teams that make the playoffs now, we know that there's more teams that made it before, and the MLB has grown the postseason format as we've gone on the past 20 years. This is really important for teams that are making it in for their first year because the teams that lose that wild card round, especially with this extended series, you don't talk about them much. Like, I kind of forget that the Rays were in the playoffs last year. I forget about the Marlins kind of in 2020. Definitely forget about the Reds in 2020. Like, people forget that they actually made the playoffs that recent. So this is really important for teams that are like the Rangers, the Twins who are back, and even the Diamondbacks. Teams that we don't usually see here often. So if they want to be remembered and build off this year, I feel like the wild card round is definitely a big step for that. But yeah, does you find that interesting? Because I was like, yeah, I kind of do think that's kind of true. Because I feel like, yes, they're the playoff teams, but I mean, let's be honest, the playoffs don't really start into the division series for a lot of these teams.
I was literally going to say that. I think if for most good teams, like, it doesn't really matter, but for those teams, like you said, that are barely sneaking in, it, like, if you're in the wild card, it's basically missing the playoffs if you don't win any games. Like, if you go in and go 2-0, nobody cares. Like, nobody will remember, like you said about the Reds and the Marlins and everything like that. Nobody will remember you. Like Miami next year. Hopefully, nobody remember they even made the playoffs. like hopefully that the 2-0. It's such a short series, I think. And really, most of the time we remember teams isn't because of like stats or things like that. It's because of videos. I mean, you see videos. We still see videos of like Bautista's bat flip and shit. We don't remember them. They didn't win. Like, they didn't win the whole thing. We just remember those moments. And in a 3-game series, you don't have much time for many playoff moments. So yeah, 2-0, quick exit. It's like when you're in Little League and you're on the All Stars and you get 2-0 and you go back home and you're done.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, they kind of are it's the first games of the postseason, and the games that we're going to remember the most are like even the division series to some extent. Like, you don't really remember a lot of the moments in it unless it's kind of like you're watching a specific team's highlights from when they went from where they started to the World Series. So a lot of these highlights, they come from the Championship Series, World Series, and maybe NLDS, like Game 5s and 4s were in clutch moments. So that's not to say the wild card isn't a good concept, because I think it's a really good, it's an interesting format. It gives you the chance to have more teams punch their ticket. And, some of these teams like that, the Marlins, the Diamondbacks, and even like the Rangers, they're glad that the wild card exists so that they can get to play these games, even if it may only be 1 or 2 games that they potentially, well, they'll definitely play 2. So these 2 games could mean a lot for them. But for the teams like the Phillies, Dodgers, and the teams that already technically have that bye, they're glad that they're not playing this wild card round because they're technically already in the playoffs.
Right. I like that you said that because, well, like we said, it could be nothing. You could go in and lose 2 games and never remember that, or you could be. I always bring up the Phillies because it's the Phillies, but they went in, they won their wild card round, and now they have all this momentum. Came back the next year, win 90 games. Like you could screw yourself and lose all momentum, or flip the whole script and build on it and have a almost like a run for multiple years just because of that experience. I think playoff experience is such an underrated aspect of these teams. Um, like when you look at Arizona and teams like that haven't made the playoffs a lot, you don't know what's going to happen. Uh, with the Phillies last year, we didn't know if they were going to collapse or if they were going to do good because we've never seen them do that in 10 years, 11 years. It's interesting. You could, like you said, the wild card concept is really good, and you can go really far to the right or really far to the left. So it's going to be fun, definitely.
Yeah. Well, kicking off the postseason action tomorrow or later today at 3 p.m. is the mediocre game. You got the Twins hosting the Toronto Blue Jays. The Twins, obviously, we mentioned in our live stream, probably the weakest um, team in this seeding, but they are technically the third seed, so they get home field advantage because they won the weak AL Central. So just briefly, kind of just what are you looking forward to in this series, or what do you have to talk about? And then we'll briefly talk after we each both give our takes, who's going to win this series. But I'm trying to get like a general feeling of how you feel about this series.
Yeah, like you said, probably the least uh, fun one to watch in the next couple of days, but it's going to be pitching, man. You're projected to probably have Gosman and Jose Barrias on Toronto's side, and then you have Pablo Lopez and Sonny Gray with Joe Ryan as that third guy. Joe, was he hurt? Wasn't he hurt earlier in the season?
I think he's healthy. I think
Yeah,
he'll
he's
he'll
healthy
be
now,
pitching
but
that third game.
right. So you're just going to have pitching out the ass. I think that's the big thing. The question mark, in my opinion, really two question marks because I did read something today about Carlos Correa being a little bit banged up, which could be bad for the Twins because their lineup is not amazing. But the Toronto Blue Jays lineup, man, star-studded. You have a lot of good guys in that lineup, underperforming, really, really underperforming. Um, Something like the Braves last year, the Dodgers last year, could see something like that happening. But it's all about the pitching. It's all about the pitching, man. It's going to be fun to watch. I talked a lot of shit on the Twins. I think every podcast I talk shit on the Twins. So it'll be a little surprise later. But yeah, Toronto's crawling into the playoffs, 4-6 in their last 10. Twins are 7-3 in their last 10. Uh, it's definitely a pitching matchup based series. So it's going to be a lot like the Phillies Cardinals last year, 1-2 run games. Coming down to the last innings, in my opinion. Not a lot of barn burners, but good pitching.
Yeah. And yeah, before we give our picks, I'll give my 2 cents in it because I've not been high on the Twins, but I always thought they were the best team in that division, which isn't saying much because I just thought they were the most complete. They probably had the most star power, even compared to the White Sox, who have a lot of these young guys like Dylan Cease, Luis Robert. I mean, even to an extent, until he collapsed this year, Tim Anderson was technically one of the better young shortstops. He won a batting title not that long ago.
Right.
So the Twins come out of the Central Division. They're getting a lot of shit. In my opinion, I still think it's fair that they are the third seed because I think it does put an emphasis on winning your division. I mean, they didn't ask for it; they were just put in that division. They won it, and they were the best team. So I still think it's fair that they get home field advantage because it's not much separates between them and the Blue Jays. They had a close enough record. If the only thing is if it was at the Rogers Center, maybe it would be a little bit different. But I saw the Blue Jays last year. We both saw them when they lost to the Mariners in the Rogers Center. So I don't think home field advantage. I think it does matter, but in the wild card round, because it's so short, honestly, anything can happen. And last year we saw a lot of
I was
home
about to say,
wild card teams lose
right?
because it's so similar to the regular season where not much, like the smallest play could change that little series. So But you mentioned the Blue Jays and the Twins. They just have really good pitching, and besides the Phillies, I feel like the Twins probably have the most complete pitching staff. Because once you get past those top three in the rotation with Sonny Gray, Joe Ryan, and Pablo Lopez, who's starting the game one, their bullpen's pretty good. And old friend Kenta Maeda has been a nice hybrid guy, similar to his role with the Dodgers, where he could either be your fourth starter or he's giving you pretty big innings out of the bullpen. So that's definitely something that's going to help the Twins out in this series because their offense really is home run or bust. I looked at this season stats this year. They outslugged the Blue Jays in home runs this year. They hit more home runs than them, and that was kind of their run producing
Yeah.
like for the most of the season. And it makes sense when you got guys like Byron Buxton, Joey Gallo, and even Royce Lewis who came back. These are guys that are known to just be the new baseball, low average, and then just beat you on a home run. In the regular season, it doesn't really translate to 162. But in the playoffs, I think it does. Because if you have good pitching and then timely hitting, this is the type of team that I feel like can just be annoying and win a couple games and do something. Because just by looking at paper, and you mentioned like a big X factor in this is Carlos Correa. This motherfucker lives for the playoffs,
Yes, sir.
and he already mentioned it. He's had a bad season with the Twins. He's been really unhealthy. Weirdly enough, it wasn't the ankle injury that didn't get him the contract with the Mets or the Giants. I think it's something with his shoulder or I believe.
Yeah, I think it was.
Um, but he mentioned that it's a new season, like the real season starts now, and pretty much I share that sentiment with him. One huge pivotal hit that can push them forward. I would just remember Correa's season from that. And the Twins, they haven't won a playoff series in I think 20 years, and the Yankees aren't in the playoffs this year to eliminate them, so they may actually win a playoff series. I'm not sure because a lot's riding on it now because the Yankees aren't there. The team that's eliminated them countless times. But the Blue Jays, I feel like you mentioned in their past 10 games, they haven't really been the best team. They did drop a series to the Rays, but I mean, the Rays are the Rays. They were the better team in the full year. But even in the past 20, they've kind of just been a 500 ball club going 10-10. So I'm not super hype about either team.
Yeah.
I definitely think it's going to come down to the wire, but I'm interested to see. We'll say pick time. Twins, Blue Jays. What's your picks and how many games?
After listening to you, I'm not as scared because I thought we were going to be different, but I think the Twins win, man. I think the Twins win in 3. I think, yeah, dude, who thought I'd pick the fucking Twins? But I think one of the games the Toronto lineup shows up and barrels the shit out of either Pablo Lopez or Sonny Gray, scores 10 runs. But I think the other two pitchers in Minnesota are just too good. And like you said, a couple clutch hits, one good one from Correa, and I'm sure Minnesota will be pretty happy with that signing, man. I just don't think you can keep Toronto down for the first 2 games. I think they're gonna get one. But hey, man, let the Twins win something, man. No Yankees in the way, like you said. So I'm taking Twins 2-1.
Yeah, I'm gonna share that same vote with you. I'm gonna go Twins, but I'm gonna go Twins in 2 games. I just think Pablo Lopez has been the guy that the Twins have needed. And in terms of fair trade, we mentioned it probably a long time earlier. I mean, Luis Arraez going to the Marlins and then Pablo Lopez going to the Twins. The Twins needed an ace, and then they pretty much got it. He was pitching to a Cy Young caliber all season. I definitely think it gives him a great chance to win game 1. And game 2 going Sonny Gray, he's been clutch in the playoffs before, and he's been having a really good season this year. And I just think that combination of a 1-2 and then maybe bringing a Kenta Maeda from the bullpen to close things out in bulk innings, and then timely it hits, man. You may see Joey Gallo go yard. You may see Royce Lewis go yard. Byron Buxton will be back. And Carlos Correa, the postseason god himself, he's if the Twins are going to win this series, whether it's in 3 games or 2 games, those guys that I mentioned, but especially Carlos Correa, have to show up. But I think they do in this first round. And I think a lot of it probably has to do with a lot of how much shit people are talking about the Twins. I feel like they obviously hear this. And the benefit of them being in a bad division is that they basically have been, besides the Braves who have been clinched for like almost a month, the Twins were kind of in that realm too because everybody around them was mediocre. So they had the opportunity to put certain players on the injured list to rest them, get them ready for October so that they can all be healthy. You know, Correa's been on the injured list, Buxton's been on the injured list, and then I think Joe, you mentioned earlier, Joe Ryan was also on that list as well. So now they're ready to play good, healthy baseball, hopefully starting today.
Yeah, man. I The Sonny Gray is the one I think they get to. I think they get to Sonny Gray just because he does have strikeout stuff, but I think the Blue Jays lineup is just too good skill wise to be set down for 3 straight games. But I like everything else you said. The shit talking, Carlos Correa is in there. I think the $7 tickets. We're seeing it everywhere on fucking Twitter. Yeah, I don't see the Twins losing just for a collection of all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, staying in the American League, we got two teams that at the beginning of the season we thought were at least going to win their division, and now they end up finishing both second place and playing in the wild card, and that is the Tampa Bay Rays hosting the Texas Rangers in the next set of the American League wild card. Interesting matchup, and it's a home playoff series for the Rays. It seems in the years past, I can't remember the last year that they started off like a wild card round or even a division series like at home. So it's been a while, seeing baseball start at the Trop. I believe this game is late afternoon, like 4 or 5 o'clock. Texas, they were one win away from winning the division. All they had to do was win yesterday, and unfortunately, they couldn't do that. And the Astros took advantage. The only team in that division that was in playoff contention that they had the tiebreaker for was with the Rangers, and they ended up finishing with the same record, both having 90 wins. I'm interested to see what you think about this series and what highlights you got.
Yeah, it's definitely way more. It's probably honestly one of the more interesting ones, if not the most interesting one. You have a team in Texas that was so good at the beginning of the year, clicking on all cylinders. DeGrom and Scherzer and all these guys. Now they have injuries. The bullpen's not living up to the hype. There's a lot of question marks there with Texas. Then you have Tampa Bay, who also started off really hot. Settled down a little bit. They lost some key players. But again, still have some really good top end pitching, which is what I like. Their game one starter is Tyler Glasnow, which Diamond Club boy, no doubt. And then Eflin. Zach Eflin's been really good for them this year. It's good to see because he's had injury problems in the past. But he's such a good guy. So it's good to see Eflin doing good out there in Tampa Bay. I think there's a couple things to look out for. One is Bruce Bochy, man. Bruce Bochy and playoff success is one and the same. So that could be a big playing factor for the Rangers. But I just think the Rays just win, man. It's another case of the Astros, of the Dodgers, people like that. That pitching staff's really deep, and we know pitching's how you win in the playoffs. I think that's what really carries them throughout the playoffs. So we'll have to see into like the DS and stuff like that. I guess you can see who I picked, but the top end pitching talent for the Rays, I think, will carry them through this wild card round.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch to talk about both of these teams, whether it's did they underperform in the second half? Did they not meet expectations? I mean, like we're talking about a Rays team where earlier in like June or July, I wrote an article saying that hot take, maybe they could be that team that wins like 111 to 116 games. It didn't work out that way. They end up losing the division to the Orioles. They still had a really good season. Like they still finished with the second best record in the American League. It's just that the way the playoff format is that they have to play that wild card round. At least it's at home for them, where it's always good to play the first game of a playoff series at your home ballpark. And then the Rangers, man, they've also had some disappointment in the second half, but especially in the month of August and September, where they saw that the division lead that they've had for over 120 days dwindle and dwindle. Mariners coming up fast, Astros coming up fast, and then they ultimately lose on the last day of the season.
Mm-hmm.
As a player, it's probably demoralizing to say, all right, well, now we lost a division. Now we have to travel all the way to the East Coast and play the Rays, who are not a team that you can just. I feel like every year we always toss them to the side, but we know, like smart baseball fans know that the Rays, they're just gonna Ray. They know how to win ball games, and I'm glad you brought up Eflin because Philly's legend. I feel like he's finally found a place where they're going to use him, I guess, the right way. And he wanted to be a starter. And he's definitely the Rays this year. They've never had a starting rotation. They
Yeah.
finally build one. And then the downside is that 3/4 of them end up getting hurt between Shane Baz, McClanahan, and then who was the other one? Rasmussen or
It was, yeah. Was it Rasmussen?
was it
I
Rasmussen?
think so.
Yeah.
Right.
They all end up getting out for the year. And those are three big pitchers. But the Rays, they just know how to draft, develop, and pry talent, and they've put together a really good pitching staff. They still have the top guys in the rotation who are starting game 1 and 2 with Glasnow and Eflin. But their bullpen has probably been one of the best or the best, you could argue, in the American League, and they're getting hot at the right time. It seems like that the Rays are putting things together offensively, even though they've lost a lot of stars to injury. We mentioned last week Brandon Lowe's out for 4 to 6 weeks. He's not even going to come back until maybe the World Series if they made it that far, and that's a big if. I mean, we all know what happened to Wander Franco. Chris Hansen got him, and he's gone for the year, potentially forever. And not only do you have to deal with the loss of his bat, but you also have to deal with the culture or the clubhouse culture from the fallout of that. Because I can't imagine that's an easy discussion or an easy gut punch to swallow. Um, so I feel like both these teams have a lot of things to get over the hump, and it's really interesting to see how both of them come out in this game one. Um, but the biggest concern for the Rangers for me is what we've been saying all year, and everyone's beating a dead horse, but it's their bullpen, dude. The bullpen has been consistently awful all season. It seems that whatever trade that they made didn't help. But Aroldis Chapman, while his ERA is low, he hasn't been that lockdown closer that they desperately need. And yeah, the whole team has blown saves. I looked it up today, and I was like, well, I know Jake mentioned a couple episodes ago how much they had. They have 33 for the year. That's like reverse closer. Like that's like a reverse elite closer.
It's
33
like
saves. That means that's 33 potential wins that
right.
were just wasted.
Right.
That this team could have used to win the division. And then in a small series of 3 games, that means a lot, especially when their rotation, we've already mentioned, there's no Scherzer this round. I mean, you got Evaldi, but he's running on limbs. He got teed off against the Mariners last week. And your best starter is their starter for game 1 and Jordan Lyles. And even he's had some shaky starts in the second half or the month of September. So I know their offense will carry them, but if the Rays can lock down that offense, I think it's going to be really hard for the Rangers to come out of this with a series win.
It's tough for the short series to really say because like what I said with the Blue Jays, you don't know that lineup could come out there and fucking rake for the first 2 games. But I agree with you. I think that the Rangers lineup is going to have to carry, but how much can you really carry against Tyler Glasnow and Zach Eflin? You know what I mean? It's they could come out and hit the shit out of Glasnow, or they could come out and do nothing. I think it's really a question mark. But I always trust pitching, man. We figured this out years ago. Pitching and defense and bullpen is what wins you championships. So I think Tampa wins it in 2. I think Glasnow and Eflin. Honestly, I think Eflin is better suited against this Rangers lineup than Glasnow is. So if they can get through game 1, I think they have a really good shot in 2.
This is where I kind of wish I had like just a coin toss to do it because I feel like the Rangers, if they hit well, I think they would win this series. And I think the best way to swallow that pill from losing the division is to come out here and fire on all cylinders in offense. And it's probably been the method of their attack all season. Score a shit ton of runs. We'll figure out the pitching later. And I originally earlier today had the Rays winning this one, but I'm going with Corey Seager, Marcus Semien, and the Rangers. I think Glasnow probably shuts them down in game one, but I think Eflin and whoever they put out there for game three, even if it's a bullpen games are tough in October, and that's something that I'm worried about with the Dodgers when we do the division series preview later this week. You never know what you're gonna get, man. Like I've mentioned how the Rays bullpen's been awesome, but I feel like if these teams get into a slugfest, I'm taking the Rangers probably 10 times out of 10, just because at least their lineup is more complete than the Rays. I think it's a 3-game series. I think this one goes all three, and I just feel like the Rangers narrowly sneak out of there.
I don't think I can trust him, man. I just can't, because I've been trusting them all along. You can go back and look at it. I picked them to win the division after they started collapsing. I still did all this. The Rays win, and the Rangers are unproven in my opinion. Bruce Bochy's not, but that lineup is. You have a lot of young guys in there, a lot of guys who could get really hot or really cold. But like you said, it could easily go either way. I think it all just depends on how the pitching comes out in that first game.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Bruce Bochy. That's another guy I didn't even really think about. But,
Yeah.
I mean, Kevin Cash is a really good manager on the Rays. He's been around there for a long time. He's been in the World Series. He's been to deep playoff runs. And winning with the way the Rays run things, it's nothing short, Like, the Rays, like, they don't always have the superstars. They don't always put together the best rosters. It's a group effort from top to bottom. And I don't know. I just feel like sometimes the Rays magic kind of just runs out. I feel like it's just been such a negative year for the Rays, and I feel like there's been so much stuff that's not gone their way. It wouldn't surprise me that they lose in the first round again, because they lost in the wild card round last year too to the Guardians. So I would like the Rays to win because it would be a nice matchup. I believe whoever wins this series plays I think the Astros.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm going to trust the Rangers one more time because I did say they would probably lose in the division series, but that's because I thought they were at least maybe going to win the division. So they can go next week and lose to the Astros. So
Yeah, you brought it up, man. Corey Seager, that's a big X factor. If he can keep doing what he's doing, I don't think anybody can really stop him.
Yeah. Well, now we move on to the National League, and this is where things get interesting. Both National League series are the primetime games. Immediately after our live stream, they announced the MLB start times for all these games. And I remember we both said, I can't imagine them not saying the Phillies or the Brewers, these two games aren't going to be the prime time. So Phillies, we're kicking it off first. They get the primetime match, 8 o'clock start time for all three games. Phillies are hosting the Miami Marlins. You're a Phillies fan. You're going to be there on Wednesday. You just witnessed them not only kind of change their season from the first half because, they were floating around 500, maybe could miss the playoffs. You never gave up. You knew they were making the playoffs. You watched them last season where no one gave them a shot, including myself. I thought they were going to lose to the Cardinals, and every single round they proved me wrong. So where do you see the Phillies starting off Red October this year? Now they face the Miami Marlins, who you said to me, out of all the teams that were making in that playoff hunt, you said you didn't want to play the Miami Marlins. So why is that, and what do you think we got to see in this series?
You're gonna see a lot of baseballs flying out of the stadium, in my opinion. Yeah, it's different, man. This is a team that it's just like you and the Dodgers. You don't really understand them until you watch them. Man. I watch them 150 games probably this year. It's just a different vibe. Like I said to you before, I think the Marlins are definitely not the people who we wanted to really play. But I think it was just because it was the Marlins. We always play tough against the Marlins. They always play us tough. I think not last year, but the year before, they even had a winning record against us. But I just think the negative juju that comes from Miami is just going to be overtaken by that positive juju, from the Phillies and from last year. The big question mark, honestly, in my opinion, the only thing I'm scared about is Miami's throwing two lefties. They have Jesus Luzardo and they have Braxton Garrett, which are best hitters, Bryce Harper, Kyle Schwarber, Bryson Stott.
Stott better be in that lineup
Yeah,
tomorrow. I
my
swear, or
God, don't
tonight.
even
I
get me started
swear.
on that, man. Don't even get me started. But yeah, man, I think the lefties scare me a little bit, but you got Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola going against them. You shouldn't have any problems. On paper, this should be the easiest series of the wild card. And I hate doing this because now it's going to be on the internet. But the Phillies should roll over this. It depends on what Nola does, definitely in game two. But he's been rolling. He's been dealing the last few games in our clinching game, and even I think he had a start before that that was really good. So it's it's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of energy like last year. Even with the lefties, I mean, you still have boppers. You have Alec Bohm, you have Nick Castellanos, who are leading RBI guys other than Kyle Schwarber. I don't think you have a problem here. You can talk about it more from the outside perspective because obviously I'm going to be a little bit biased, but I just think this is going to be the easiest series of the wild card. Hopefully,
Yeah, you mentioned it. All Phillies fans that I know that watch baseball regularly, the one team that they don't want to play is the Marlins. And it's not because the Marlins are the greatest team in the National League, because they're not. It's just that for whatever reason, for the past 5-6 years, the Marlins, whenever they come to play the Phillies, that's their playoffs. And now they're meeting in the playoffs. And, you know, this season, the Marlins, we didn't think we're going to be here, and they proved us wrong. Skip Schumacher's done a really good job guiding this club to be a playoff team, and especially down the stretch when it mattered. They were good. In their last 20 games, they went 12-8.
definitely.
And they took advantage over every other playoff team that was in that hunt. The Cubs going downward. They missed the playoffs. They make it in. They even leapt past the Diamondbacks, who I thought were going to be in Philadelphia this week, and they end up getting the 5th seed instead. So, I mean, they're not a bad baseball team. They have good pitching, and the thing is their roster isn't even fully complete because of how many guys they've lost to injury. And the biggest one is Sandy Alcantara, who, yes, it wasn't having a good year that we've mentioned a bunch of times, but he's the Cy Young winner last year. In the playoffs, I don't really care. Like, if he was here, it would definitely change the outlook of this series. But you bring up the Phillies, man. Like, last year, it was kind of like, ride. Like,
I agree.
I didn't think we were going to be here. You've seen so many years where they've fallen short in September. You were just happy that they had the chance to play the playoffs. And they kind of played that way too, where, they didn't have any expectations. Like, sure, the players were going to be like, yeah, our expectation is always to win the World Series. Every team's going to tell you that. But everybody, like even fans were like, even if we lose the wild card or the DS, it's whatever. But now this season, it's a little bit different. You're coming off an NL championship, falling just short of the World Series. And now the expectation around the league for a lot of people is that the Phillies may end up be back-to-back NL pennant champions, So can they do that? Can they get that monkey off their back? Will they play good knowing that now there's going to be a lot more eyes looking at them? I think they can, but I think this series, I mean, I know you think it's going to be a cakewalk, but I think this series is going to test the Phillies a lot. And I think the biggest X factor for that, you already mentioned, is Aaron Nola. If Aaron Nola carries his nice September over to the postseason, then the Phillies pretty much got their game plan back to where they had it last year. They're going to ride Wheeler, they're going to ride Nola, and they're going to hope that the big guys can get some nice home runs and timely hits, which is pretty much the key to success in the playoffs. Do I think this series ends quickly? No. I think it still goes full 3 games. I think the Marlins are just going to be stingy. And depending on whoever they throw in that third game, I'm like kind of tossing it up, but I still trust the Phillies enough. But yeah, the Marlins, it's definitely going to be an interesting. They won the season series against the Phillies this year 7-6, so that just shows how tight this contest was all year and the past probably 3 years. So I'm glad you get to see it front row, and hopefully Nola gives you a good start.
Yeah, it's not going to be fun if he does not, because Nola, that will be one of his last starts in Philly probably. But I agree with you, man. I'm not saying that it's a cakewalk, because nothing is ever a cakewalk. But when you look at this on paper, you're not even right. If you're a fucking Red Sox fan and you have no care about this, and you look at this, it's Philly all the way. I mean, they win in every aspect. I think that, like you said, the postseason experience, I think it's going to help them a lot more, man. It's a different type of atmosphere in that clubhouse. It's not the same as some of these other clubs. It's like, okay, we're here. We were here. Like you said, I agree with you 100%. I just won a home playoff game last year, and then we made the World Series. This year, it's like, okay, we've been there. We can't get out early now. Like, we don't want. It's not that we can't for the image. It's we can't because we cannot physically endure that. Like, the fans, the city, the players, they all think that way. It's because that's all we have. All we have is Phillies baseball. I'll say it 2-0. I think honestly, I think the closer game is game one. I think Wheels gives up probably a run or two, and we win 3 or 4-2. And I think in the second game, I think Nola does really well, and I think we put up a bunch of runs.
Yeah. I think it's going to be back and forth. I think the Phils probably jump out front, take advantage of a young starter in Luzardo in game one. Seasoned veteran Wheeler probably goes on cruise control. He's had a really good season, good playoff track record. Game two is where it kind of gets shaky, because I feel like even if Nola is off to his Nola-esque in 2023, that's maybe around 2 to 3 runs, and I feel like the Marlins could definitely match that. It could go either way. I think the most interesting game would be if it is pushed to 3, to see what the Phillies game plan and pitching matchup is. And I already mentioned it last week, Yuri Perez, he's a flamethrower rookie pitcher that similar comps to Sandy Alcantara. And from the brief stuff I've seen from him, he's definitely someone that can be built for the moment. My bold take is I think the Phillies walk it off in the third game, go crazy with that. I don't know who you want to pick. It'll probably be Trey Turner, because fuck me. I don't know. So
it's so funny you said that, because I was literally talking to Ryan, and he said, "Oh, who's doing it?" And I said, "It's Trey. Trey's gonna live up to the moment." I would hate that, because it means we got the game 3 and we were tied in the 9th. But it would be sick. It would
then I'm
definitely.
going to show you. Then we're going to watch playoff Trey highlights against the Braves when he was on the Dodgers and he went like 0 for 15. Yeah, so we'll highlight that. But
the World Baseball Classic highlights.
I think the series between these two it's going to be tight, just because of the way these two teams played each other the past couple seasons. The Marlins seem to show up against the Phillies for whatever reason, and I don't know. It could easily end in just 2 games, as much as I could see the Marlins potentially even winning this series. But I think the Phillies, while it won't be a cakewalk like we said, I definitely think they'll come out of this one on top.
Ranger is going to be game 3 most likely. So that's just something to think about.
Everybody will be in game 3 most likely if it comes down to whoever's on the team. Yeah.
Right.
Well, staying in the National League, couple things kind of changed from this series today. Brewers, they win the NL Central. They had a really good month of September. They've had a really good month and a half since August 18th. They actually have the best record in the league, 27 wins and 13 losses. That's better than the Dodgers, Braves, Phillies, all the good teams that are in this playoffs right now. This is another team that we kind of talk a lot of shit about, coming from a Central division. We've never really had a lot of faith in the team, but they've shown flashes of greatness. And they host the Arizona Diamondbacks, who me and you, we were in Los Angeles. We saw them on opening day. And I said it before the year even started. I said it to the Dodgers Beat, Believe Those Podcasts, all them guys. I said the D-backs are the team that I think will make the wild card. Not the Padres, not the Giants. I thought the Diamondbacks had a put together offense and great pitching that I thought they could at least make the wild card. And it was a bad landing, but they ended up doing it. And I still think that same sentiment goes. Their pitching matchups kind of got funky for this series, but it still gives them a fighting chance, I think. So I'm interested. Where do you see this series going, especially since these are two teams that you could potentially see if the Phillies go on to the NLCS?
It's funny. It's real funny because, like you said, we talk shit on the two division winners that are in the wild card for the NL or for the AL and the NL. But honestly, I know we saw Woodruff went down earlier. Probably going to miss the playoffs, which is a big loss for them. But still, man, pitching. Milwaukee's got so much pitching there. Craig Counsell, we talked about it, probably going to be the top manager on the market this offseason. Great game manager with his bullpen now, or with his guys out of the bullpen too. But yeah, we saw Arizona in the beginning of the season, man. That team's fun. That team's fun to watch, man. They have some boppers. They got a lot of speed, good defense. And of course, like you said, they have pitching. They got Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly, which will be game 2 and 3 because they had to set up their rotation because they didn't get in, like we talked about last episode. But yeah, it's definitely, honestly, it's another one of those ones where will the Diamondbacks lineup show up? They haven't had a ton of experience in the playoffs. They have some veteran guys, though, that could definitely help them out in that aspect. But I just think the pitching and the big game prowess of the Brewers, the I don't know, they're living up to the moment more, like you said, down the stretch. I think that carries them into the playoffs, not far, but at least through this round.
Yeah. It's interesting, it kind of sucks. So there's two things that both these teams both had huge losses. Obviously you mentioned the Brewers losing Brandon Woodruff. That's their game 2 starter. He's out for not just this round, but potentially the entire postseason. And then the Diamondbacks, because of the games that they had to play, because they didn't know if they were going to be in the playoffs, they didn't get the chance to set their rotation, like we mentioned last week, that most of these teams that clinched, if you're going to do anything, that's what you have to do. So they're at a bit of, like now they have to pitch a guy, I can't even pronounce his name.
Yeah, that rookie.
that he's got an ERA over 5, and he's got to go up against Corbin Burns. That's a hard game 1 to win. I like the idea of Merrill Kelly and Zach Gallen in games 2 and 3, but you got to make sure you win game 1 for that to really matter. Like, if you lose game 1, that puts a lot of pressure on Gallen to win game 2, and he's shown a lot of Cy Young-esque stuff this year, but he still didn't blow anybody away, Like, he had a lot of wins, but wins, that really isn't the best pitching stat. His ERA was still near 4. Do I trust him in an elimination game? I don't know, because we never really seen this Diamondbacks team in that spot before. And the Brewers, like you mentioned, pitching. Even though Woodruff's down, they still have to face Burns and Peralta, and then that bullpen is nasty. They've had a really good bullpen probably since like 2017. The way the Brewers are built is just good pitching. The biggest red flag for the Brewers is just their offense. And it's similar to the Twins in where it seems like the only way they can produce runs is maybe through the home run, and they don't even have that many home run hitters. And the guys that should be home run hitters, like Rowdy Tellez, these guys aren't really hitting the numbers that they hit in previous years. So it's interesting. I really don't know how to go about this series because I just feel like these two teams are both so evenly matched, where I think this series is probably the most competitive, probably, because I feel like either one of these teams definitely could have a lot of arguments going their way for, yes, this team's going to win, or yes, this team's going to win. I think at the end of it, I think it becomes a game of the rule changes, the stolen bases. And if I think a team can take advantage of that, I think it's the Diamondbacks. We already mentioned the speed that they have. Corbin Carroll being at the top of that lineup, not only can he hit for power, he can run, he can steal bases. He may have a noodle arm that we saw, but he can play decent defense out there in the outfield. He's definitely an X factor. If the D-backs are going to go anywhere, he has to be a big part of that for this round at least too. Before Woodruff didn't go down, I know it's just one pitcher, but I feel like it kind of affects their outlook for the potential like games 3 if they had to go to that. And I think if that happens, the D-backs have the advantage of their two best pitchers lining up for games 2 and games 3. I'm just gonna go with it. I don't really trust the Brewers in the playoffs. Besides 2018, that's probably the only year that they've made a deep run and probably was their best chance of going to the World Series. You know, we saw what happened in 2019 where they blew it against Washington. 2020, they didn't do anything against the Dodgers in that wild card round. 2021, they lose to the Braves, and last year they didn't make the playoffs last year. I don't think so. This season, they don't blow me away, and I see a lot of MLB Network analysts that are picking this team to go to the World Series. I don't see this team even beating the Phillies in like a 5 or 7 game series. It really just doesn't make sense to me. I would even give the Marlins more shot to beat the Brewers, honestly, just because I like the Marlins offense better than the Brewers offense. And that's saying something because the Marlins offense isn't going to blow you away either. So I think the Diamondbacks sneak away out of here. This series matters to me just because this is whoever wins this plays the Dodgers. So, yeah, do I want to see another division team go up against the Dodgers? I don't care, really. I'm just going to take it game by game this year. But I think the Diamondbacks find some way to get out of this series with a win. Even though they've been playing pretty average, similar to the Blue Jays, they've had a 10-10 record the past 20 games. I mean, anything can happen in the playoffs. I think if there's going to be an upset in the National League, it'll be the Diamondbacks beating the Brewers.
I was gonna ask. I was gonna say, is Eric Lauer still on the Brewers? Because then it really matters because you don't want to face that motherfucker. But yeah, it's gonna be nice for the viewers. Finally, I think we're gonna disagree on something for once. I think Milwaukee matches up well for the shorter series. Like you said, I don't think it's a World Series run. Again, we're going to disagree again. I think Allen deals a game too. I think that's the game that the Diamondbacks win. Like you said,
I trust Merrill Kelly more than Gallen, and that's only just because he's been awful against the Dodgers. But every time I ever turn the channel on like MLB TV, I see that he's had like 7 shutout innings against some other team, and I'm like, all right, this guy just can't put it together against the NL West juggernaut.
Yeah, I think he's a guy. If you look into him more, I'm going to say he's a lot like Trevor Bauer in the aspect of how analytical he is and how much he works on like spin rate and things like that. Like you said earlier about like Alcantara and Yuri Perez, they got stuff, man. Like I'm putting my best stuff out there. It's like the Kirkering kid that's probably gonna make the Phillies roster. I don't give a shit. Like I want my best stuff out there. I think Gallen is one of the best pitchers, probably a top 6 or 7 pitcher in the league, in my opinion, when he gets to his peak. But I think that's the only game they win. I just don't. I don't trust that lineup. I've seen him go real cold, and there's not a lot of playoff experience. I think it's another situation of like the Rays where they have a deeper bullpen, a good manager. They've been there before. They understand the moment. I think that they'll be more prepared, which was what will give them that slight edge. Like you said, it's going to be real competitive, but I think Milwaukee by a toenail.
Yeah, I definitely could see it going either way. I'd like to see the D-backs move on to get another rematch
much rather
of that series. But even if the Brewers move on, like we mentioned, maybe we'll be talking about this week. Their outlook changes with Woodruff's injury. It may not affect them this round, but it's definitely going to affect them in the future if they move on. I just like the Diamondbacks. I vibe with that team. I think you're going to see a lot of good. Like it's just no one in that lineup for Milwaukee really scares me. And we mentioned it before, but the only 2 hitters that they really have in that lineup, like Carlos Santana and the Mark Canha, who they traded for, because everybody else, even Willie Adames, who I saw so many Dodger fans beg to trade for, hasn't put up the numbers that he put up in 2021. Low average, isn't hitting near 40 home runs like he has in the past, and he's not really the best defender out there either. So I just feel like the D-backs will put it together, but I definitely think it could go either way. I definitely think it's going 3 games, and that's the thing. With that third game, especially in a short series, there's so much pressure put on. It's really going to be up who shows up in the moment more. And maybe that does help the Brewers because they have been in this situation more in the past, but they just have never lived up to that situation before. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. Closing out, we've talked about all these wildcard teams. Um, Obviously, for any wildcard team, it's a long shot for them to not only go to the World Series, but win the World Series. But I feel like recently, especially since 2013, since the wildcard kind of got expanded, we've seen a lot of wildcard teams go on runs and win the World Series or at least make an appearance. And we saw it last year with the Phillies. We've seen some other winners with the Giants, Royals, all these other teams. So that begs the question, out of all these teams playing this week, this early in October, kicking off the postseason, which team probably has the best chance to make it to the World Series or win it?
I'll say two because there's one obvious one, and I won't talk on it a lot. It's obviously the Phillies. They've been there. They have the lineup. They have better pitching than last year. They're probably one of the best teams in this wild card round. But this is going to be a little weird because I did pick the Rays. But like you said, if the Rangers lineup gets fucking hot, man, that's another team that could hit their way to the World Series. Like that lineup can score 8 runs every night, I think. So they like we talked about. Minnesota's not very deep in that lineup. Toronto's too wishy-washy. Milwaukee doesn't have a lot other than their top end pitching. Their lineup's not good. Miami is Miami. I don't think they'll play well against many other teams other than probably Milwaukee, like you said. So I think out of these teams, I think Texas will probably have the next best shot. If they're able to get hot and get back to, like you said, be mad because they lost their division by 1 game. It'd be fun to watch because if we get to see, you're probably going to say that 20 Corey Seager back, then they could make a run.
Yeah, I'll answer this question kind of similar to how you did, kind of breaking it down basically per league. I think obviously out of this round, I don't think the Brewers have the pitching anymore to get them that deep into a postseason run. I definitely don't think they have the offense for it. Diamondbacks are kind of the same way, where it seems like after Merrill Kelly and Zach Gallen, there's really nobody. Their bullpen isn't the best either. And besides Corbin Carroll and Christian Walker, that lineup's pretty mute. The Phillies, we've known about it since July. In terms of top teams in the National League, you can't really argue around it. It's Braves, Dodgers, Phillies. It's been that way probably since the middle of the season. It's going to be that way, hopefully, next week when we're talking the division series. I think they probably have the best shot to dethrone the Braves, and they match up. I hate to say it, the Phillies match up really well against.
Dethrone the Braves. You're talking to the 2022 NL champion.
All right. Well, I also think they match up really well against the Dodgers, and whether it's the pitching that they have, I feel like they can definitely lock up some of our hitters, especially in the playoffs where it seems like most Dodger guys, they just forget how to hit for some reason. Check swing Mookie Betts. I swear to God, if I see any more of that this postseason. Yeah, I mean, it has to be the Phillies. Out of all these teams here, they're probably the most complete. They're the one team that has the most World Series ambitions. So in the National League, it has to be them. In the American League, I'm going to get crucified for this, but I think it's the Twins. And I think it's the Twins because if they can put together something on offense and their pitching just stays okay, I already said they have probably – I was trying to think about it long and hard, but I couldn't picture another team that has a more complete rotation than them, than other than like the Phillies. And even the Braves, they have their faults. The Dodgers have theirs. But looking in the American League, I mean, the Orioles figured it out, but did they? Their trade acquisitions didn't work out really. What's his name got moved to the bullpen? Jack Flaherty. And they kind of, most of their starters, besides one guy, have had ERAs over 4. They've just had a really good pitching staff. Their bullpen's been really deep and kept them into a lot of these games. I just feel like Carlos Correa, get him in the playoffs. I'm never going to hate on him in the playoffs because I just feel like he shows up. But their path to the World Series seems... I mean, if they win this game, if they beat the Blue Jays, they would have to play the Orioles.
Right.
And the Orioles, it seems, like they are more of an, or do they play the Orioles or do they play the Astros?
They would play the 1 seed. They would play the 1 seed because it's like the
Okay.
Phillies and Marlins.
Okay, yeah. So no.
They would play the 2 seed. You're right.
No, they played 2 seeds. So they would play the Astros.
Mhm.
The Astros, man, they're not.
They're not what
They
they.
barely won the division, and this is a time where if anyone's gonna dethrone them, it should be them. And then if they end up meeting the Orioles, like in the championship series, I mean, that's even to say if the Orioles get to the championship series, because I don't really. They're young. I'm gonna root for them, but you don't know what you're gonna get out of this team. So I'll just go out on a limb and say the Twins. They're probably gonna get eliminated in 2 games, so who cares? But just gotta be different.
It's honestly a thing like the Brewers. Like I said earlier, they match up well for this. Like for a, I don't know.
Like
It's
a
the
3 to 5 game series.
right.
That's
It's the
what they
opposite of the Brewers. The Brewers that match up well for that short series. Like you said, they have three. The Twins have 3 really good pitchers. I can't even think of the rest of the rotation. They probably have another guy that they can use. Like a Noah Syndergaard that could come in and pitch like a game 4 or something. I wanted to say it honestly. I wanted to, but the lineup is too many question marks in my opinion. The AL is definitely an easier road because you have the Orioles who are unproven, you have the Astros, of course. But yeah, man, like you get into the NLDS, if the Twins can win this quickly, you have Joe Ryan, then you go back to the top, you have Pablo Lopez, you have Sonny Gray again in the first 3 games. Like I like my team at least 2 out of 3 of those if I had those guys pitching. I think I'm not going to be mad at you at all. I like that. I think we both went on opposite spectrums. I went on the team that could, hit their way to the World Series. You went on the team that could pitch their way to the World Series. So it's really just seeing what happens, I guess, later tonight.
Yeah. Well, like that'll about wrap it up for this episode. We got a bunch of wildcard games that are starting in the afternoon and then ending in Philadelphia against the Marlins, which should probably be the best series, I think, in this wildcard matchups. We will be back on Friday to talk about the division series. Hopefully, Jake's Phillies have made it to face the Atlanta Braves. If not, he probably won't
be out
here. So we're hoping for a lot of good games. Definitely keep an eye out on Jake's Twitter, my Twitter, and then the Diamond Club. He should definitely have a bunch of stuff posted while he's there on Wednesday, potentially in a clinching game, which is probably what you're hoping for. So it'll definitely be a great set of games in the National League and the American League. Kind of sucks for some of the times, like we mentioned earlier, with the Twins and the Rays playing at 3 and 5 o'clock. Can't imagine many people watch those games, especially on the West and Central Coast. But that's baseball. So catch us on Friday for our division series preview. But now it's the wild card, and October is officially beginning.
Sure. Go Phils.